you take a step back and you look at what's happening in the US, the SMEs, SMBs are pretty poorly served when it comes to cross-border payments. And a lot of these community banks and regional banks are trying to service them, but they're in turn poorly serviced by the larger corresponding banks. And you see kind of with increased globalization, demand is going up for the service, but actually supply is coming down as a lot of these larger banks, I guess, de-risking their portfolios. And there's no clear ROI to support the community and regional bank segment.
Welcome to the Tearsheet Podcast. I'm Zack Miller. International payments and money transfer firms are among the first of this generation's fintech leaders. But even if they offer white label or API solutions, companies like TransferWise are typically strongly focused on an end customer. Currencycloud takes a different approach, helping other fintechs, community banks, and FIs to offer international payments and FX. Standard Bank, Monese, Starling Bank, Klarna, and Travelex are all customers. Currencycloud Co-founder Richard Arundel moved to the US a couple years ago to spearhead the UK firm's expansion there. We talk about the nature of different geographic approaches to fintech and how big tech payment solutions are the biggest threat to banks and fintechs alike. Richard Arundel is my guest today on the Tearsheet Podcast.
So I'm Richard Arundel. I am co-founder and currently general manager for North America for Currencycloud. As you'll tell by my accent, I am a native Englishman, but I moved over to the US about 18 months ago, over here to New York.
An Englishman in New York. So how did that transition go?
Well, I've got 3 young children, and when we decided that I was going to come out here, I had 2 young children. And then 2 weeks later, my wife kind of dropped the bombshell that number 3 was on the way. So I actually have my very own kind of American baby. So he was born out here. So the transition was fine from a work point of view, a little bit hectic from a family point of view. But listen, I mean, they're both cosmopolitan cities and from just outside London and worked in London. So the transition has actually been pretty smooth.
So I want to come back to New York as part of your distribution, your expansion strategy. But can you tell the audience a little bit about what Currencycloud is? And I personally would like to hear where the idea came from, like what the genesis story was.
Yeah, sure. So Currencycloud is a payments platform. It's a cross-border payments platform. We help, I guess, other businesses service their customers better when it comes to FX and cross-border payments. We're a tech company. Ultimately, our strategy is a B2B to X model. So we aren't direct to market. We work with banks, FIs, other fintechs, who ultimately are the ones who face the market directly. We've been Currencycloud since, I think, 2012 is when we branded as Currencycloud. We actually started the company back in kind of end of 2008, kind of early 2009, which, if you cast your memory back, was a great time to set up a financial services company.
And was it a pivot to go B2B to X, or did you start out with that concept?
That was always the idea. We did spend, I guess, the early months, maybe up to a year, servicing some customers directly. We had a direct-to-customer brand, and that was really a case of, I guess, funding the growth of the business. Our model was always around that. The gap that we saw in the market was there has to be a better way to service customers who are ultimately servicing their end customers, and if we can do that via technology, then all the better. This was, I guess, the start of the rise of fintech back then, and you had a lot of what are now really interesting companies kind of being born around that time. So
and went against the grain of some of those, Richard, right? Like the fact most of those companies back then were B2C, right?
They were, and some of them, we know very well, and some of them are still our customers. And I think whilst they were B2C, I guess our model was, and I come from my last company, and one of my other co-founders' last companies was a B2C and B2B direct to market company. We were working with a lot of referral partners, and really the gap we saw was how can we enable companies to service their customers better? We never went into it saying how can we grow a huge B2C presence or a B2B presence. It was always around that, being I guess the plumbing. Think of us as like the AWS of payments. We handle that messiness so our customers can then, I guess, take the credit and service customers from a really cool kind of UX point of view.
And so who are those customers? You can name a couple by name, but like, what is there a typical demographic, a typical industry? What makes them unique?
So a big part of our business, certainly from EMEA, is, I guess, the challenger bank type customers. So think of people like Starling Bank, think of people like Monzo, those type of companies, and it's a big thing in EMEA at the moment. I think less so in the US in terms of cross-border payments. I think a lot of the challenger type banks are mainly focused on kind of middle America savings, so there isn't a huge cross-border payment requirement at the moment. But kind of neobanks and then larger banks, so think kind of Standard Bank of South Africa. You think other companies like Travelex is quite a well-known brand, and that's one of our customers. So kind of really exciting brands, some kind of digitally native customers and some kind of digital transformers who are looking to I guess, catch up with the digital transformation. And then over here in the US, we have two clear markets. We have one is what we call the mid-tier banking segment. And by mid-tier, we're kind of sub $10 billion or sub kind of $12 billion. So think someone like Brookline Bank up in Boston. So they're a kind of typical customer for us. And the other category we look at is, thanks to our marketing team, actually, I like sticking the knife into marketing, but it's a catch-all of fintech. And we call it fintech, but really this is around kind of integrated payment solutions. So this could be a B2B marketplace. It could be a lending firm, so like Sellers Funding provides kind of lending to marketplace companies. So anybody who's looking to, I guess, integrate and own the customer experience when it comes to the payment side of business.
And Jay, so the Brookline Bank, just to go back to, I just want to make sure I'm clear. You're integrated into their online offering, and they're offering you to their end customer. Is that correct?
Yes. So we have two models. We have an integrated offering. I mean, we're an API company, so API is in our blood. However, we do have a kind of a white labeled front end, a white labeled GUI. So actually, with Brookline, this was a go to market strategy for them, which was how can we quickly get to market? We need to service our customers. I think if you take a step back and you look at what's happening in the US, the SMEs, SMBs are pretty poorly served when it comes to cross border payments. And a lot of these community banks and regional banks are trying to service them, but they're in turn poorly serviced by the larger corresponding banks. And you see kind of with increased globalization, demand is going up for the service, but actually supply is coming down as a lot of these larger banks, I guess, de-risking their portfolios. And there's no clear ROI to support the community and regional bank segment. So from a Brookline point of view, they wanted to be able to go to market, service this increasing demand from their increasingly global customers. And you all know how banks work. The challenge a lot of them have is they have these outdated legacy systems. The pace of innovation is quite slow. It takes a huge amount of time to get from R&D into actually development. But with a fully branded front-end platform, they can get to market in a few weeks and put something in front of their customers. They can also use that internally to at least stay up with this pace of demand that their customers had.
So one of the common themes on Tearsheet is sort of this. It started out more as competition between like challengers versus incumbents. Now we're talking obviously more about co-opetition, collaboration between the two. How do you see this playing out? I mean, you service some of these banks. Like, are challengers obviously they're acquiring a lot of new and opening a lot of new accounts, but do you see them displacing sort of the incumbent industry over time?
Excuse me. It's a good question, and I think, as I said, if I use the experience in EMEA, where the challenger banks are there, I think at the moment where we are is the challenger banks are doing a really good job of bringing these additional services to the market. So if I take our business in terms of kind of payments and FX, they're delivering that in a much better way to their customers. I think it would be really interesting to dive into the stats of actually, are these challenger banks taking away the whole account from the incumbents? And that's really, I think, what people care about is, and banks have traditionally made their money in kind of loans, deposits, etc. That's what they care about. And whilst they're acknowledging the requirement to add additional services, especially in the wave of kind of digital, how are these? How successful have these challenger banks been at actually stealing the whole account away from these incumbents? And that's actually, I don't know the answer to that. But I think when they start to do that, that's when they become an existential threat to these incumbents.
And I guess as a corollary to that question, what role would payments play in them sort of being able to take the whole account? Like, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I guess a lot of it depends on the makeup of their customers and the types of business they're going after. But ultimately, if you look at how globalization has been a factor over the last, I guess, 5 or 6 years, it's a reality. It's part of our everyday life. People are sending money overseas, and from a North American point of view, people are expecting to receive money overseas and not in dollars anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to send your money to euros and sterling in Japanese yen, whatever it might be. So I think payments will become an increasingly important factor, and if these challenges, all the incumbents, I mean, listen, the incumbents are aware of this, and I think it's just a priority decision at the moment. But if these challenges can offer a seamless user experience, and for me, this doesn't come down to price, and we can talk about that. This is all around the user experience. We live in this kind of, I guess, on-demand economy. You sometimes refer it to as like a lazy economy. People just want to press a button and see their payment go. And I think that will become quite an important aspect of where an SME or a corporate decides to place their business. And if they can offer them, and if they're offering them more and more services that are delivered seamlessly, digitally, and offer a really, really good user experience, then these guys are going to increasingly win.
And I guess you have competition from the banks coming from a different direction too. I mean, we just read recently about Facebook's payment solution, adopting a blockchain solution. But definitely big tech is rolling out payment solutions if they don't have one already. How do you see their role competitively in the marketplace?
We've discussed it a lot, and I think the next couple of years will tell us a lot. And by big tech, I look at people like, and Facebook's interesting, but
Mm-hmm.
I look at people like Amazon,
Mm-hmm.
and how much of a threat are they going to be both to fintech and also to incumbent banks? And would Amazon ever get to a stage where they would be offering loans and deposits? Now, I don't think they need to. I don't think someone like Amazon will necessarily need to take on the I guess the financial burdens and the challenges of actually offering a full banking service. What they will probably end up doing is consuming lots of other services they could go and roll out to their ecosystem. That is probably a threat, I think, because they've got lots of money, right? And ultimately, if they decide to do stuff, and if you read a lot of the recent reports around Bezos saying, there's a lot that goes on underneath the outside PR in Amazon that you just don't hear about. And they have so many projects that are kind of, they try, they fail, they try again. So they could be looking at this to say, actually, especially in the payment side of things, I could just go and do this. I'd spend a couple of years, I'd go and build this out. I could take out a bunch of these fintechs without even thinking about it, because it's becoming such a behemoth. So it is a threat. Again, I think it depends where their priorities lie. And actually, do they want to offer something that's, if you look at what Amazon is, they've got such a big ecosystem. Are they just trying to service that ecosystem, or are they looking to say, actually, I could use an Amazon payment system and take that out to the wider market?
Just want to go back to Currencycloud now, I guess, and realign the conversation. So the company was started in the UK, is that correct? And then you came out to the US to run the business. Why was it important for a co-founder to come out and run the US business? So what role does it play in your view of going to market?
Really good question, and something we've discussed a lot, because we're opening up other offices kind of globally as well. So we started in London, headquartered in London. We came out to the US in kind of late 2014. But when I say came out to the US, we did what a lot of people do, is we stuck a couple of people in a WeWork office, and under the naive impression that the business would be very similar to the UK. But I think payments in North America, certainly in terms of kind of fintech adoption, is probably 4 or 5 years behind. So we didn't have, I guess, that Currencycloud DNA out here in the US for the first few years, and we tried to build it. I think going back to that decision in late 2014, it was looking at ourselves. We kind of looked at ourselves and said, we need to have a global presence. US is the largest economy in the world. We need to be out there. So we stuck a couple of people, and I don't think we gave it the support we should have done. So I came out here in 2017, and as a co-founder, I have that kind of DNA here. So I think what I brought and the decision to bring me out here was a link between HQ and the North American office that we hadn't had before. And the previous decision was someone who really understands the US market rather than someone who really understands our value proposition and the problems that we're helping to solve. So we probably got that wrong. So I think understanding the US market is probably the easy part, actually. Understanding.
Do you have a lot of hands-on contact with customers in the US?
Me personally?
You personally, yeah.
I do. My background actually before coming out here was I was running, I guess, our post-sale division, which involved account management, customer service, implementation teams. So I had a lot of hands-on experience back then as well. It's something that I enjoy doing, and a big part of the segments that we've chosen to go after is all around referenceability, and it's they want to hear what we're all about. So I think in the US there's still a huge kind of education gap in terms of cross-border payments and the solutions to that. So where I can, I speak to most, if not all, of our customers, and I'm not selling them. The teams that we have are the experts in that. This is really, and for me, it's understanding. I'm still really interested. I think most other co-founders would share that same sentiment, that they're just generally interested in the types of customers that they're servicing. It's a really good story for us. It fills me with a huge amount of pride when we sign our customers, and just to understand their story. And I think it is I guess a collaborative sell, because if you think about back to our business model, ultimately we aren't selling direct to market. We're selling to the companies who have the customers themselves. So together we're thinking about the solutions to the problems of the end market, which is, I guess, quite a unique position that we're in.
That curiosity is a really interesting point from a founder perspective. And when you find you go into the customers, this is still about Currencycloud, like, are you competing against sort of an in-house solution? Are you competing against other vendors? Like where do you see the competition coming from in the US specifically and in the UK?
So in the US specifically, it's a lot of the time it's the banks. If you look at the flow of funds, the banks still control kind of 93% of cross-border payments when it comes to the US. So a lot of the time it's the bigger banks. And if we're talking about the banking segment, they kind of have, I guess, three choices. They either stick with their current banking solution, they either build something themselves, and both of them aren't ideal, or they look for an outside vendor. So really it's either competing internally, and a lot of people don't have that, I guess, in-house experience when it comes to cross-border in the US, or it's competing against the larger banks. In EMEA and also in kind of Southeast Asia, there are other companies like us that we compete against, depending on the segment that we're going after. And I think that's a great thing. Listen, we welcome competition in our industry because I think competition helps build the market, and especially when it comes to kind of payments, especially when you're up against the banks who control such a large proportion of that pie, having kind of two or three people attack it, and their competition, but we speak to them a lot about the challenges of the industry. You see them at events, you see them at panels, but really in the US, it's more the bigger banks that we compete against.
So Richard, we have time for one last question. I'm curious if you could share a little bit about your priorities for the rest of 2019. I'm particularly interested in hearing about maybe any new products you guys are working on, or new markets you're expanding to.
Yeah, so globally, really, we've had a big focus on payables when it comes to cross-border payments, and this is all around sending payments out. I guess not quite a transition, but the evolution of our product is to make this all around essentially a global account. So the ability to support both payables and receivables. And I think receivables is a whole different challenge, especially here in the US. This is around how customers are getting paid from their customers in Europe and the rest of the world. So what you'll see with Currencycloud in 2019 is a much bigger focus on creating this global account, which, as I said, is the payables and receivables side of the platform. We'll have presence out in Asia, either by the end of this year or early 2020. Thanks to my lovely UK government, we now have presence in Amsterdam to counteract anything for Brexit.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so it's expanding globally. and expanding, I guess, the platform capability. Not necessarily in terms of the kind of network reach. So we're not going to be a company that's in 200 countries in the world. I think that has its own challenges. This is around servicing the core currencies, the core networks with one global account.
I lied about it being the last question. I have one more question for you. I'm a product guy sitting in a potential customer, a prospect of yours. Like, what has to go right to be able to have a successful partnership with Currencycloud?
So I think for us, it's all around identifying the problem you guys have and identifying the impact that problem has, and then working together to find the solution. And sometimes, we hold our hands up. The solution might not be us. You might just not have this problem. I think what needs to be right is you guys understand that cross-border payments is a problem, and how you handle it currently, you are not catering to the demand and the needs of your customer base. If that is the problem, and the impact of that problem may well be around your plans for globalization, or you're a very customer-centric driven organization. You want to offer a seamless digital experience to your customers, and by not controlling the payment side of things, you therefore can't control that experience. If you get to that stage, then the rest is pretty easy. As I said, we're an API company. Our APIs are, this is my sales pitch, our APIs are best in class. And we have some really good customer feedback on that. And we went to the market as a tech-led solution. So I think if you get to that stage from a product perspective and an engineer and developer perspective, we're on a good path, because then it's just around connecting the APIs into your workflow, which is pretty simple, and working together to help you guys service your customers.
Richard, thanks for joining us on the Tearsheet Podcast today.
Thanks, Zach. It's been a pleasure.